Thunder cracked like splitting bone across the high plains. A streak of lightning lit the ridge, revealing a rider galloping hell-bent toward nowhere. Mud flung high from the hooves of the horse, a paint gelding lathered and wide-eyed. The rider, small slight, clutched the reins with raw hands, veil whipping from her head like a banner of surrender. Behind her, two distant figures gave chase, rifles flashing silent tongues of fire in the dark. The only sound now was wind rain and the ragged gasp of the horse laboring beneath her. Her dress had once been white, but the trail had taken its toll, torn at the knees, streaked with blood and soot, the hem swallowed by the rain-slicked earth. A river crossing rose ahead, swollen and wild. She didn't slow. The gelding leapt and swallowed near whole by the surge. She held on, half praying, half screaming. A silver chain snapped from her neck and vanished in the flood. They emerged on the other side, soaked and shivering. The thunder had quieted now, but the fear hadn't. Somewhere behind, hooves still pounded, somewhere ahead lights. Just one lantern hanging crooked from the edge of a porch that looked like it hadn't known visitors in years. She slipped from the saddle, legs folding under her. Crawled through the mud. Her hand slapped wood. She raised her face, eyes hollow, cheeks smeared with ash and rain. She said nothing. Didn't need to. Then collapsed. Inside the cabin, a shadow stirred. A hand paused over a revolver. Boots stepped quietly to the door. The old hinges groaned. And for the first time in a decade, Silas Creedy let a stranger cross his threshold. Silas Creedy had lived alone for 10 years on the edge of Red Elk Valley, his cabin squatting in the crook of the hills, like a forgotten grave marker. He spoke to no one. He wrote no letters. The nearest town, Leadbrace, sat over 30 miles east, and he hadn't set foot there since the last snow of '65. The cabin was sturdy, if weather-worn beams blackened by sunroof patched with elk-hide shutters that hadn't opened since the day the war ended. Inside, he kept his world small. A cot, a pot-belly stove, a row of books he never read, and a single photograph half burned tucked behind a whiskey bottle on the mantel. In the photo, a boy sat grinning on the shoulders of a woman in a Sunday dress. Silas wasn't in the picture, but the boy had his eyes. The woman had a laugh that once echoed through this valley, now swallowed by wind and regret. Silas wore their memory like a weight in his chest. He hadn't cut his beard in years. His hair had turned the color of ash. And on his left ring finger, the gold band remained never taken off, never acknowledged. Each morning he woke before light and rode the fence line. Not for cattle, he'd sold off the last of them 6 winters ago, but to check for boot tracks, coyote kills, or signs the world remembered him. He carried a Winchester he'd rebuilt with parts from 2 others. He could still shoot, though he seldom had reason. His only companion was an old buckskin horse named Jarvie, slow in the knees, loyal as breath. The girl had not stirred since he'd carried her inside. Her skin was clammy, her hands cut at the knuckles, and she reeked of wood smoke and fear. He'd cleaned her feet and wrapped them in dry cloth, sat her by the fire, waited. She'd mumbled once in her sleep something about the badge and can't go back, but otherwise lay quiet. Now he sat in the rocker, staring. She looked maybe 20. Her face was smudged with grit, her lips cracked, and a bruise flowered beneath her left eye. On her finger, a crooked ring still clung, a thin thing, tin or pewter. Not real, not wedding, but something worn in desperation. He'd seen that kind of ring before. The storm had passed, but thunder still muttered beyond the hills. Silas kept his hand near the rifle. His mind rolled back to a place he hated, a campfire in Missouri. A bottle passed between brothers in arms, and a promise broken by a man with a silver tooth and a preacher's voice. When the girl finally opened her eyes, they were wide green and full of something that made Silas stand still. Not fear, not hope. Recognition, though they had never met. "You got a name?" he asked, voice like sand and winter bark. She tried to speak, coughed, and failed. Silas poured water into a tin cup, held it out. "Ain't poison." She drank slow and shaking. Her throat worked around each swallow like it hurt to take anything in. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Murney." He didn't flinch, just nodded once. "You running from something, Clara Murney?" She looked toward the shuttered window where wind still teased the corners of the cabin. "Yes," she said. "But it's not just me thereafter." Silas stared a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the door, and bolted it for the first time in years. Morning found the valley blanketed in mist, a low fog curling around fence posts like ghostly fingers. Clara Murney sat curled in a wool blanket on Silas's cot, the wedding dress now stripped of its soaked layers and hanging by the stove, steaming faintly like it still remembered the storm. She wore one of Silas's old shirt sleeves rolled to her elbows, her knees drawn to her chest. Her feet wrapped in linen had stopped bleeding but bore the imprint of river stones and thorn brush. She hadn't spoken much and Silas hadn't pushed. He moved about his chores with the rhythm of a man who'd long abandoned the idea of hurry, chopping wood, checking snares, feeding the horse. Still he returned every so often, glancing through the cabin's half-open door as if checking she hadn't vanished into smoke. By noon she sat at his table, ate beans and cornbread in slow bites, flinching at each creak of the wind. Silas watched her without asking why she was here, without asking who she ran from. But she saw the questions behind his eyes. "They married me without words," she said, voice distant. No preacher, no vows, just a room full of eyes and him saying I'd smile for it was over. Silas kept eating. She looked at her hands. "I hit him with a lantern. Didn't kill him. But I saw his face catch fire. That was enough." Still Silas said nothing. "I thought I could get away. Thought if I got far enough, maybe." She trailed off. "You don't know what it's like to be claimed like a prize hog." "I do," he said simply. That quieted her. She looked at him, then really looked. "Why'd you help me?" Silas didn't meet her eyes. He reached into the fire's side and pulled out the kettle. Poured her more coffee, didn't plan to. "What changed?" He hesitated. "You knocked on my door." She smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. "That all it takes?" "No," he said. And that was the end of it. That night she helped him oil the rifle. Her hands moved clumsily, but she watched, learned. He gave her a small knife. She took it like a drowning woman takes air. Days passed. She healed slow. Her voice grew steadier. Her silences grew longer. He showed her how to saddle the buckskin, how to boil water with pine needles for fever, how to tie knots that wouldn't slip. But not once did she speak his name, and not once did he offer it. One evening she stood by the porch staring at the horizon. "He'll come," she said softly. "He's not the kind to let go. He'll bring men, maybe 10, maybe more." Silas chewed a sliver of jerky. "How soon?" She shook her head. "Depends how long that fire kept him from riding." The silence stretched between them long as a river. "I could leave," she said. "Tonight. Spare you this." Silas looked at her, then eyes dark as burnt oak. "Don't run on feet that ain't healed. And don't speak like you owe me." She bit her lip, then asked the thing that had been on her mind since that first night. "Why do you live like this?" Silas paused, looked toward the mountains, then said, "Because ghosts prefer quiet." She didn't ask more. But in the weeks that followed, she never once mentioned leaving again. They came through Leadbrace on a Thursday, 5 riders with soot-black dusters and faces half hidden by red bandanas. No lawman dared question them. The townsfolk knew better than to ask who they hunted. At the center rode Marshal Greeley, towering in the saddle, a silver star pinned where a heart should be. His eyes were pale as salt. The left side of his face bore a patchwork of half-healed burns. Tight pink skin stretched over a skull that seemed carved from spite. He walked into the saloon like a drought. "Girl pass through here?" he asked, his voice lined with sandpaper and sermon. The barkeep nodded at the horseshoe prints leading west. Greeley smiled. "Red Elk?" he said. "Only one fool lives out that way." He hadn't seen Silas Creedy in 12 years. Not since the war ended, not since that night under a blood-moon sky when gold changed hands and a choice was made. Silas walked one way. Greeley walked the other, laughing with coin in his saddlebags and a pistol that had never missed. Now Greeley spat into the dust. "Time to collect what's mine." The gang he rode with called themselves the Black Hollow Circle. Each man bore the same tattoo, a circle of thorns wrapped round a hollow eye. Veterans turned outlaws. Hired hands turned fanatics. They answered only to Greeley, and Greeley answered only to whatever god kept his hate alive. They traveled fast. By dusk, they'd reached the edge of Red Elk Valley. Smoke curled in the distance, cabin smoke. Greeley halted, raised a fist. "He's here," he said. Inside the cabin, Silas watched the same smoke from a knoll. He'd seen the riders hours before through the old spyglass he kept wrapped in oilcloth. He'd known they'd come. "You knew him?" Clara asked. Silas nodded once. "He wore blue when I met him. Same as me. Fought hard, spoke soft, killed fast." Clara's face twisted. "He thinks I belong to him. Says my daddy owed him blood. Said he took me in payment." Silas said nothing. Just knelt beside the stump, sharpening a rust-pitted Bowie knife on a stone older than both of them. "They won't stop," Clara said. "They're animals." "No," Silas said. "Animals don't burn women's faces to send messages." He rose, slid the knife into his belt. From the back room he dragged out a crate. Inside were things he hadn't touched in a decade: a cavalry saber, a worn satchel of cartridges, a hat riddled with bullet holes, and a badge scorched and bent but still legible. He left the badge behind. That night he and Clara dug trenches. He showed her how to set bear traps under leaves, how to tie a trip line with bells from an old saddlebag. She learned quick. She didn't flinch when he handed her a shotgun. "You know how to use it, I'll learn," she said. "You'll only get one shot if they rush. I won't miss." They built fire lines, dragged brush-soaked rags and kerosene. Silas cut down the old bridge leading into the North Ridge, forcing the riders through a narrow gully where he knew every stone. He'd hunted cougar there once. Now he planned to hunt worse. By dawn, the wind had shifted. Jarvie snorted in the corral. Silas stood by the porch, loading his Winchester eyes, scanning the hills like he could read the morning scripture in the folds of fog. Clara came up beside him. "You ever think about running every day?" he said. "Why don't you?" He looked at her, and for a moment Clara saw something raw in him. Not rage, not sorrow, but a kind of tired hope. "Because someday," he said, "you stop running and start deciding who you really are." Down in the valley, the Black Hollow Circle crept closer, their horses moving slow, deliberate. They didn't expect a fight. They expected surrender. They didn't know Silas Creedy had buried his fear long ago. They didn't know what it meant for a dead man to rise. The first shot split the morning like a gavel crack. Silas's Winchester sang from the ridge, and one of Greeley's men tumbled sideways off his horse before the echoes died. The others scrambled, spurring their mounts to cover, but too late they'd ridden straight into the gully just as he'd planned. Bear traps snapped like teeth. A second man screamed, ankle caught and crushed, and another was thrown when his horse panicked at the scent of blood. Greeley cursed and dismounted, eyes scanning the ridgeline. "He's here," he barked. "Fan out." But the valley wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to Silas. Every rock, every tree, every shadow, it knew him. He moved like a ghost, loading quick, breathing slow. Clara crouched near the cabin, shotgun trembling in her grip, eyes trained on the east approach. She remembered every instruction. Don't shoot until you see their eyes. Don't waste a shell. 2 riders broke off toward the cabin. She swallowed fear and raised the barrel. They didn't see her until the first one was nearly on the porch. She fired. The man's chest folded in like paper, and the recoil knocked her back, but she scrambled up, blood roaring in her ears. The second outlaw ducked behind the corral fence, returned fire. Wood shattered above Clara's head. She crawled behind the water trough, shaking, fumbling for the second shell. The outlaw moved fast, circling left, shouting to someone out of sight. Silas saw it from the hill. He dropped the man with a clean shot through the neck, then rolled to a new perch as a bullet cracked the stone where he'd just been. Greeley was below now, stalking with his Colt drawn, barking orders like battlefield sermons. "Creedy," he shouted. "You owe me, you bastard," Silas answered with silence. A shot, then a thud. Another man down. But they were too many. A third rider crept along the north fence and lit a torch. The dry grass caught instantly. Smoke rolled across the yard. Clara coughed, eyes stinging, but held her ground. She saw Silas dart from cover, knife flashing, and tackle the man before he could throw the torch toward the roof. They struggled in the mud, close and vicious. Silas drove the blade into the man's gut and held it there, watching the life drain from his eyes. He didn't stand right away, just knelt there, chest heaving. Blood soaked his sleeve. From behind the trees, another shot rang out. Silas staggered, clutching his side. The hill swayed under his boots. He stumbled back toward the cabin as Clara ran to meet him, dragging him behind the well. "Bullet grazed you," she said, breathless, pressing cloth to his side. "You'll live. Doesn't feel like it. They're pulling back." He blinked through the smoke. "No, they're waiting." Sure enough, Greeley stood at the edge of the yard, arms wide, hat off, silver badge glinting in the sun. Behind him, only 3 men remained, cautious, bloodied, uncertain. "Creedy," he called again. "I ain't your enemy. You think this girl's worth dying over. She ain't yours. She ran from her debt. From me. From the law. You're no law," Silas growled, propping himself up. "Not since the Missouri line." Greeley grinned. "We both know what we did that night. You walked away. I made peace with it, but she's just a witness, a stray. She's under my roof. That's your line now. You protect anyone who knocks on your door." Silas stared at Clara, who knelt beside him, dirt-streaked and pale, but still unbroken. He looked back to Greeley. "Yes," he said. Greeley's face twitched. He holstered his gun, then reached into his coat and pulled out a bundle, leather-bound, stained, tossed it toward the porch. It landed with a slap. "Read it," he said. "That's her father's ledger. He owed me. Gambling whiskey debts stacked 10 years deep. When he couldn't pay, he promised her hand. That's legal in some corners. That's law." Clara lunged forward, grabbed the bundle, flipped it open. Her hands shook. Her lips moved, reading silently. Then she dropped it like it burned her. "He signed it," she said, voice hollow. "He really did." Silas watched her crumble inside. Her spine straightened, but her eyes lost color. Greeley stepped forward. "She's mine, Creedy. You fight now, you die over something that was never yours to save." Clara stood. The shotgun was gone, but she held the knife now. "You'll have to kill me," she said. "I was planning to," Greeley replied, cold. The moment cracked. The final charge began. Silas rose to meet it. Blood oozed from his side. His legs barely held. But he fired again, dropped another man, then swung the rifle like a club into the next. Clara slashed, missed, then drove the blade into the outlaw's thigh as he grabbed her. He screamed, staggered back straight into Silas's boot, which kicked him off the porch. Now it was just Greeley. He advanced slowly, gun-drawn face unreadable. Silas raised the rifle empty. Greeley smiled. Finally, he fired. Silas fell. Clara screamed, but then Greeley staggered, looked down. Blood bloomed on his chest. Behind him, Clara's knife glinted. She had thrown it. He turned, gasped, dropped to one knee, tried to lift the gun again. Silas, on his back, reached for the dropped Colt nearby. His fingers closed around the grip. One last shot. Greeley collapsed face first into the mud. His silver badge rolled loose, gleaming, once then dulled in the blood. The valley fell quiet. Clara crawled to Silas, pressed her hands to his side. He looked at her, eyes dimming. "You held the porch," he whispered. She nodded, tears running clean through the dust. "So did you," she said. The sun dipped low, turning the valley gold and rust. Smoke curled from the cabin's west wall where a stray torch had singed the siding. Clara had dragged Silas inside, laid him on the cot. He drifted in and out, sweating through his shirt, breath rattling shallow. She cleaned the wound as best she could, burned cloth to cauterize, whispered old prayers she hadn't said since she was a girl, hiding in church pews from her father's debts. Night fell slow. The fire flickered low. Outside, wolves howled, far off, mourning or celebrating, she couldn't tell which. When Silas opened his eyes again, they were clouded. He tried to speak. Clara leaned in close. "You'll live," she whispered. "You have to." He gave the faintest shake of his head. "Tell me." She swallowed hard. "It wasn't just my father's debts. Greeley. He wanted land. Our land. There's silver under it. My daddy wouldn't sell. So Greeley did what he always does, found a way to own what wasn't his. My father went missing a week after the papers were signed." Silas blinked slow. "Greeley always wanted more." Clara nodded. "He didn't want a wife. He wanted a symbol. to show he owned everything my family ever touched. I wasn't a bride. I was a trophy. Her voice cracked. I ran the night before the wedding. His brother Tom, he helped me. Said Greeley had turned poison after the war. Said he saw what he did to you. Silas's brow furrowed. Tom. She nodded. He said he rode with you once, that you saved his life near Cold Point Ridge. He tried to make it right. Silas closed his eyes a moment. Cold Point Ridge. A memory rose, a young man's screaming leg pinned under a burning cart. Silas dragging him out while shells rained down. Tom had courage, Silas murmured. Clara's jaw tensed. He's dead. Greeley caught him helping me. Left him hanging in front of the church. She looked away. I saw it before I ran. Silas's hand moved. Not far. Just enough to rest on hers. I failed him, he said. Long time ago you didn't fail me, Clara said. You stayed. Silas coughed, wet, painful. Not much longer. Don't, she whispered. He looked toward the fire. Its light danced across the cabin walls, casting the shadow of a man who'd carried too much for too long. There's something, he said, voice thin, each word a rock uphill. Behind the mantel, loose board. Clara went, pulled at the warped wood. Behind it she found a bundle old oilcloth tied with rawhide. Inside a map faded but legible. Silver veins drawn through mountains west of Red Elk. A deed with his name, and a letter never sent. She read the name at the top. Lila Creedy. My wife Silas said, eyes closing. The letter was short. Lila, if you're reading this, it means I've found something that might buy our freedom. Silver. Enough to leave this valley to bury what the war took from us. I'll bring it home. Just hold on. I'll make it right. Below a note scrawled later, hand shaking, but I came too late. Clara pressed the letter to her chest. She died waiting, she asked. Silas nodded. So did my boy. Fever. I was chasing something I thought would save us. He winced. Didn't see the cost. Clara wiped her eyes. You saved me. That matters. He looked at her, then really looked, as if trying to etch her face into memory. You take the map. Find the claim. It's yours now. I don't want silver. It's not for silver. It's for what you'll build on it. A place they can't burn down. She nodded. I'll find it. Silas coughed again. A trickle of red at the corner of his mouth. Outside, the wind shifted. A calm settled over the valley, the kind of silence that only follows storm. Clara sat beside him, held his hand until it went still. When the dawn came, it painted the valley in soft light. The riders were gone. Greeley's badge lay cold on the porch, and inside the cabin a woman in a torn dress sat alone, beside a man who had finally found peace. The next morning, Clara built a pyre. She worked with numb hands, stacking logs beside the creek where the water ran clean and steady. She found his hat, the one with the bullet holes, and set it gently atop the pile. The letter he wrote Lila she folded and tucked into his coat pocket. She left the badge where it lay. It belonged to another time. But the wedding band worn thin on his finger, she slid off with trembling fingers and clutched it tight in her fist. She lit the fire at dusk, watched it catch slow at first, then devour the old wool and worn leather and the man who had stood when no one else would. Smoke lifted toward the sky, not in chaos, but as a ribbon-clean, silent final. Jarvie stood nearby, still and alert, as if he too understood something sacred was passing. Clara rubbed his neck, whispered, "He was yours before he was mine." When the last embers died, Clara packed what she could, the map, the deed, a canteen, Silas's old knife. She took the saddle and placed it gently on Jarvie's back. Her dress, now stained with ash and stitched with dried blood, she folded and buried beneath the porch. Before she left, she walked to the edge of the cabin, knelt by the hearthstone, and carved something into the wood with the point of the knife. 3 letters, SCM Silas Creedy Murney. Then she dropped the wedding band into the ashes. It struck a coal, rolled, and came to rest beside a curled page of scripture Silas had once used to patch the roof. Clara mounted Jarvie and rode west. The valley stretched out before her, endless and uncertain. But she carried something now. Not silver, not vengeance. A name, a story, a kind of peace that had been bought with blood and choice. Days passed, then weeks. She found the claim marked by a tree with an iron nail driven through its heart. The vein ran shallow, but the water ran true. She built a small cabin there, stone by stone. Grew corn, learned to shoot with more than fear. Some nights she'd sit outside and look east toward the valley she came from. Sometimes she wept, sometimes she smiled. She never wore a ring again. But every spring she'd return to the porch at Red Elk, lay down flowers where the fire had burned clean through. No one ever disturbed the place. No one dared. A story had taken root there, about a man who never left his porch until someone needed him. And a woman who arrived with nothing but a broken dress and walked away with everything that mattered. Some say legends ride off into the sunset. Others never leave the hill they bled for. But a real one leaves behind something you can't touch, a whisper in the timber, a ring in the ashes, a name carved where wind meets wood. And if you ride west long enough, you might still find her, the girl in boots and braids, standing quiet beneath a sky that remembers. Silas Creedy's legacy, born not in gold, but in choice. Watch the next story and don't forget to subscribe.